question, beginning with Bill Flynn. Now, this is the longest question of the evening. I want to give some background before I ask the actual question, so listen carefully. In recent history, nullification has been promoted as the rightful remedy to the abuses of the federal government. The Kentucky and Virginia resolutions are usually cited in support of nullification. The problem is that all the other states at that time rejected these resolutions, and the founders argued against nullification, including Washington, Patrick Henry, Jefferson, Madison, John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams called nullification a monstrous and horrible object, and it was pretentious and fatal to the prospect and welfare of this union.
Okay, this is obviously a loaded question, so I've got to comment on it a little bit. The Kentucky-Virginia resolutions were written because John Adams, not John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams was 12. John Adams was imprisoning journalists like myself. Some of them had called him fat. Yeah, about 30 of them went to jail, and so James Madison and Thomas Jefferson wrote the Kentucky-Virginia resolutions that nullified the Alien and Sedition Act. All of the northern states were against this. Well, they were all Federalists, and that's John Adams' party. They never won the presidency again. Who did win the presidency? Well, Thomas Jefferson won the presidency. And you know what? The northern states, they wanted to secede from the Union because Jefferson had won. In his first inaugural address, he said, "I wish you luck, gentlemen." And then after that, Madison obviously won. The quote that he talks about with Madison speaking against nullification was because John C. Calhoun said if South Carolina nullifies a law, then all other states have to nullify a law. I'll also point out another mistruth in this question, is that republicanism does not say majority rule. It defends the minority.
Madison called nullification a deadly poison and said that a more fatal inlet to anarchy cannot be imagined. And Madison wrote that the true question, therefore, is whether there be a constitutional right in a single state to nullify a law of the U.S. We have seen the absurdity of such a claim in its naked and suicidal form. Madison went on to say that in his and Jefferson's view, if a single state can arrest the will of the majority, then this would violate the vital principle of republicanism, that the majority will is the ruling will. And now here's the question. Do you support nullification? And if not, how would you respond to those who want you to support nullification? And is there a rightful remedy?
Thank you for the question. And it gets to the issue of really the power that's invested in all of us in the states. In the original design in our founders, they saw the federal government as really just a core that allowed the real states to shine. If you look at the original documents, the United States of America, it was a small U. That implied that the united part was not the issue, not the big issue, but in fact the states had the greater power. On the issue of nullification, being very tuned in to how words sound and are used, nullification has actually right now gotten a bad rap, quite apart from its exact meaning. When you say nullification, I think you shut down the possibilities of communication. I think one of the opportunities we have is to redefine this. It is never appropriate for the federal government to force into the states anything that is unconstitutional. In fact, the states have the duty and the priority to push back against that. But having said all of that, we must remember that part of what we agree to under a federal government is we are loaning our power to those in positions of power. If we see that power abused, we have an opportunity and really the authority to stand up and to push back, as I mentioned earlier. So I would avoid the word nullification. I would go the direction of failure to consent and lose that as part of the issue that states have to face. Nullification is something that is ultimately hazardous to our union, and we are sworn to keep a union where at all possible. Thank you.
I think when you look at our history, when our founders looked at nullification, they did not think that nullification would be something that we would need to use. They expected our representatives, both in the House and in the Senate, to do their job with the loyalty, the faith, and the character that they were raised with, and the morals and the ethics that we saw in our nation at that time. The problem now is when you talk nullification, you talk about it as if there would be no ramifications. Our state has every right to object to unconstitutional laws coming from the federal government. But the thing that makes me shake my head now is that we would think that our president, who breaks the law every week by announcing new executive orders, would stand by and allow us to nullify without there being some kind of severe consequence for our state. I would hope that when we talk about nullification and those people who would ask me to support it, they would know their history, they would look at what time really was today and understand that it may not be the correct answer, that there are always other ways to say this law is unconstitutional and we will not put up with it, that would not cost the lives or the livelihoods of our fellow North Carolinians.
I would agree with what we've just heard stated, and I would add this to that very principle, and that is that we need to understand as citizens of North Carolina that we have a responsibility and we have the system in place to elect leaders for North Carolina who will step up to the plate and will truly, truly represent the values of the citizens of the state. I do believe that there's a better way of approach, and that is for the involvement of the individuals here to step up and to defend by the elected officials we put in place. Now, I do believe and do understand that a time comes that a state, in its sovereignty, recognizes that it will no longer be subject to the tyranny of the federal government. And that is what we witnessed when we watched the federal government on steroids and a federal government that is out of control. But I do believe it's an issue that would require that we move very carefully, very slowly, and with great understanding in the midst of it. Thank you.
Basically, with the other things that the folks have said here, I think our federal government has overreached in so many areas. And I think all of us would agree that it has gotten to the point now where they're trying to regulate and control virtually every aspect of our life. But I do think, however, that our state, even though it's a sovereign state, should be very concerned about the aspect of nullification, because that would open up so many issues that I think would basically diminish what we have been involved with over the years as a state. We have got to stand up to the federal government, but I think we do that through various means. One is working to get judges who are not going to hand down things to our state that we disagree with. You've seen it time and time again when a state has passed a referendum, only to have that state's referendum decision by the people overturned. And I think in the courts is where we're going to have to really work in order to have our state's rights recognized, both at the state level and the federal. Thank you.
There are two sides to a coin. If you give your consent, the other side is your dissent. Because we give our consent to be governed. Article 6, Clause 2 says the Constitution is supreme law of the land and pursuant thereof. In this wonderful state, in 1788, in the Hillsborough Convention, James Iredell, who was in the first Supreme Court, said if Congress ever passes a law that is not enumerated, it is null and void in the state. Also, that letter you talk about Madison actually apologized because he was actually given a draft that Jefferson actually wrote the word nullification. He wrote that letter in 1832. He was the same one that drafted nullification in 1798, the Virginia Resolution. And he was hammering Calhoun, because Calhoun said, if South Carolina nullifies a law, all other states have to listen. Madison said, no, only the state there can do it. And actually, in 1850 to 1857, 11 northern states nullified the Fugitive Slave Act that led to the conscience of saying no to slavery. Because the Supreme Court said, Wisconsin, you must listen to the federal government and give back Joshua Glover, a man we call him a slave, to Missouri, and Wisconsin said no. We have to understand federalism. We must understand, because my question is, those who do not believe in that theory, then what law would you say no to from the federal government? I already know they have 18 and 18 only.
Mother, should I trust the government?